Right, like you need the YouTubers. Like a YouTuber with 100,000 subscribers can change this country. Like someone like Andy Warski may very well change the course of Western civilization. Andy Warski, this like guy who seems completely apolitical. You know, he seems like a frat bro. He may very well change the course of Western civilization.
You have a mechanism in your brain that's seriously wrong. The data on that's pretty clear.
Well, I've struggled with that. Had quite a tough time over the years. Millions of people died fighting the lobster because women are too agreeable. So you're saying women are just more sensible. They don't want that because it's not a nice problem. You're saying it's not because of gender. It's not a fairer way of proceeding.
Many, many times. This conversation, you do it all the time.
Is it because I'm miserable?
That's part of it, definitely. It's not the only reason. I mean, look at your situation. You're hardly smart. You're bitter and resentful and without purpose and hostile.
I might as well just go and play with my Cindy dolls.
You can. Yeah, that's fine.
Mao.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Mao.
That's
Mao and Mao.
But it's happening.
Mao.
I do believe they are very uncomfortable.
Mao.
Oh, God.
Mao.
That's 25,000 times you've said that. What the hell's going on?
Frame Game Radio.
Thank you.
It's been rather uncomfortable.
The more disputes I had with them, the better acquainted I became with their arguing techniques. First, they would count on the stupidity of their adversaries, and then, if there was no way out, they pretended to be stupid themselves. If all else failed, they claimed they did not understand, or, being challenged, they would instantly jump to another subject and talk about obvious truths. If these were agreed on, they immediately applied them to entirely different matters. When they were caught off guard, they would avoid the conversation and claim they had no knowledge or understanding of the issue. No matter where you seized one of these apostles, your hand grasped slimy ooze, which spurted through your fingers only to unite again the next moment. If your argument really gave a man a shattering defeat in front of others, he could do nothing but agree. You might suppose that this was one step forward, but how surprised you would be the following day. The next morning you would find that
Finn
had not even the slightest memory of yesterday, and continues to repeat his old mischievous nonsense as if nothing at all had happened. When pressed about the previous conversation, he would pretend astonishment and could remember nothing at all except the truth of his statements, which he felt had been proven the day before. Frequently I was simply paralyzed. It was hard to know what to admire the most, their fluency or their artistry in lying. Gradually I began to hate them.
The real issue is the ability of Jews as individually and collectively to morph between an identity that is white and an identity that is Jewish selectively in whatever circumstance best suits your interest. So, for example, you can choose to be white with respect to being a part of the mainstream society, and you can choose to be Jewish with respect to having a protected, super privileged group that is immune from criticism. And I think that the alt-right's stance with respect to Jews not having white identity is really a tactical buffer around the sort of my fellow white people trick that allows Jews to have the best of both worlds from a collective bargaining perspective socially.
I mean, I think it's certain Jews who try to pull that that kind of trick off. I've never done that in my life, and I'm not interested in doing that. I will say that I'm white and Jewish. There's no contradiction, at least in my my understanding.
Right. Well, that may be true, but if you listen to, for example, Rabbi Sharon Brous, who is
there's no such thing as a female rabbi. First,
well, you okay?
There's no such thing as a female rabbi.
You're going to have to explain that to Barack Obama.
I don't have to explain anything to Barack Obama.
David, you tend to interrupt a lot. I would like to hear Frame Games Radio full paragraph, and then we move to you.
Okay.
For you to dismiss Sharon Brous sheerly because she's a woman. Whatever orthodox beliefs you may have, you are ignoring the plain and simple reality on the ground and at an institutional level. This is a woman who was voted the #1 most influential rabbi in the country and who personally swore in Barack Obama in his second term. Okay? So for you to simply disqualify her as not being Jewish is absolutely insane given those facts.
Elohei Ha'ahava, God of love, help us widen the boundaries of our hearts. You know us better than we know ourselves. The distinctions we make, the biases we hold, the ways in which we fail to manifest our greatest potential as we diminish ourselves and others with our impatience, lack of compassion and vision, lack of hope. Give depth to our faith. Let our actions bear witness to the expansiveness of your mercy. Grant us the grace to love our neighbors and to love ourselves. We pray that you bring your presence among us as light, as life, and as holy inspiration.
I suspect that part of the problem is that many Ashkenazi Jews don't see ourselves as white. And so it's very awkward to identify white and non-white Jews or white and black Jews because we don't identify the whiteness as part of our own identity. I will just say, my sense is that when Jews, growing up, I have always checked other on those sheets, when we have to write what our race is, because white, that's not me. Those were slave owners in the South. Like, my people were getting chased by, Cossacks. Like, that's not my history. And let us not forget that this campaign began with some wild accusations about Mexicans as rapists, which many of us felt should have been disqualifying.
Where's the reasonable line between free speech and hate speech? And is there anything policy-wise or legislatively we can do to eradicate hate speech?
So free speech is expressing ideas. It becomes something, we'll call it hate speech, or something else when it starts to intimidate and terrorize and threaten individuals, particularly because of inalienable characteristics that they can't change. That isn't free speech. That's something else and needs to be called out and shut down.
I'm saying that it's evidence that she's a fraud. The idea of a female rabbi I wouldn't trust anything from a quote unquote female rabbi. I mean, I'm not Orthodox. I mean, I come from an Orthodox family. I'm an atheist. But
well, David, your problem is that everyone who matters does count her as a rabbi, and not just a rabbi, an extremely powerful one with respect to the Jewish voice collectively.
The entire state. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah,
the entire state of Israel does not consider her a rabbi. The largest Jewish community in the world does not consider her a rabbi legally. She has no purchase whatsoever in the entire state of Israel.
No purchase whatsoever. So it's funny you say that, because she frequently sits on the same stage as the president of the ADL. She frequently shares the podium with high-ranking members of AIPAC and of the JFNA. She is as institutionally ingrained as you could possibly be in American Jewry. Now, with respect to whether or not the state of Israel formally recognizes her, is an issue that doesn't touch anybody here actually living in America and having to negotiate issues of Jewish influence.
So it's called coalition building, right? The reform movement was for a very long time anti-Zionist. A lot of them come from a movement that rejected Zionism, and after the Holocaust, they were convinced by sort of the conservative and Orthodox movements to join along reluctantly. There's a group called the American Council for Judaism that was pretty influential before the 1930s, and they were sort of defeated by the Zionist movement. I think rightly so, but I think that the reform movement is sort of the worst kind of sort of slippery group. They say that they're not a religion. Well, that Judaism is not just a religion. It's not a race. It's just a people.
And I say one thing, by the way. I think JF, you had that opened, and the one thing you highlighted says that females cannot become Jews. Oh, sorry, rabbis? Females cannot be Jews.
I don't know. It was that before the 1970s, it tended to be all male rabbis. However, today female rabbis are ordained within all branches of progressive Judaism, while in Orthodox Judaism, women cannot be rabbis.
Oh, okay, only in Orthodox. Okay, so
yeah, I mean, Orthodox is the actual religion. If you look at the out marriage rates of Reform Jews and quote unquote cultural Jews overall, so Reform Jews make up the majority of American Jews, and they marry out at a rate of 54%. So that means that every generation, the number of Jews, the overall out marriage rate is 54%, and it's much higher among Reform and quote unquote cultural Jews. So, I mean, these are people who are not going to exist in probably 3 or 4 generations, none in any appreciable number. They believe more in abortion than they believe in the Torah. I mean, that's their religion is liberalism. And that's a fact. That's the reason why they try this sort of slippery tactic of, they say, oh, we're white. And then they say, whenever black people accuse them of something, they say, I'm not white, I'm Jewish. Because they are afraid of black. I mean, they want black people to like.
Basically, it's kind of pathetic.
You just recognize that they do that when this was the statement of Frame Games Radio originally, that you were somewhat contesting by saying, I don't do that. So you recognize.
Well, I'm saying that the Reform movement and the progressive Judaism movement is pernicious. I agree on that.
All right.
So, of course, the point at issue here wasn't whether or not the Reform movement was pernicious, but whether or not Jews have the ability to selectively choose a Jewish or white identity depending on whether it's best for them in the circumstances. I'm choosing this clip because it was the very first point of contention in the stream, and because it really symbolizes what the whole debate went on to be like. And I'm actually just going to go pretty much live now in discussing this. I don't want to spend too much time on this video because there's so much else going on in the world that's so important. And this was really a shame, in my opinion, this debate, because it wasn't really a debate. We were told in the beginning that it wasn't really, sort of blood sports. It was just supposed to be a Friday evening conversation. And I also didn't want to make it too heated because of that reason. David is not a guy, he's not a YouTuber, he's not really an online personality, he's just kind of a guy with an opinion, and sort of stepped up in there, and it wasn't supposed to be blood sports. So I about halfway through kind of thought I was maybe being too adversarial, and there was also a number of other people on the stream. There was Babylonian Hebrew, and there was JF's own debate with Dave. So, I didn't want to take up too much of the oxygen in this particular situation. But a lot of people asked me to do a post-mortem on the debate. So I'm just going to rattle off my thoughts on it. There is that very funny line in Mein Kampf that I put in the beginning of this video about the tactic of sort of Jewish obfuscation, which as a Jew I am very well familiar with, which is that of basically trying to snow your opponent with things that they don't know, even though they're unrelated to the conversation, to create an impression in the audience's mind that, generally speaking, you know more than your opponent. So even if you can't prove your specific point, you come across as smarter than the other person. So you sort of score emotional points, not logical points to establish the actual claim at issue, but emotional points that you've sort of slam dunked on the other person. So that is what Hitler refers to as counting on the stupidity of your opponents. And then he says, this is in chapter 2, volume 1. He says, if that doesn't work, then you play dumb yourself. And this was evident in this exchange through Dave sort of selectively forgetting what we were even talking about, which was the issue of whether or not the dual identity of Jews, to choose between Jewish and white, was a thing. That is, whether or not you do have the ability to do that as a Jewish person. The answer is obviously yes, and there's a million data points to support this. There's actually a great Twitter account called Imperium, I believe, which has like a running list of, I think, at least 300 now individual fellow white people instances by blue check marks on Twitter. Funny stuff. But the point here is, what Dave did here in about 4 or 5 points in the conversation was to admit a claim after about 20 minutes of talking about it, and then pivot to something else entirely because the conversation had dragged on so long that it felt ripe to talk about a new angle. And so it was basically, it was like arguing with somebody who just had to run out the clock to try to just lose on points rather than through a knockout. And that was equally apparent here in this exchange on Holocaust classes.
As those trends continue, organized Jewish influence lobbies will continue to implement more and more draconian measures to try to prevent that from happening. And that is why one of the reasons in 2017 and 2018, we now have Holocaust classes being taught in 5 states in high school. One of the things they talk about are ways to foster Jewish identity to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to prevent the loss of Jewish identity. And one of the ways they do that is through the Holocaust. And that's one of the reasons that it's a little weird that in 2018, we have a whole semester dedicated to the Holocaust in 5 states in the country, which was not the case 10 years ago. And our country is going to suffer as a result of these attempts to try to consolidate Jewish identity.
Wait, our country is going to suffer in what way?
We have an event. We have an event that happened between 1939 and 1949 in a foreign country that is being taught. That is being suddenly taught as its own 6-month semester-long course, and that is something that is very novel to American education. There's a lot of stuff to learn in life. A lot of people might make the argument that that's not exactly what we should be doing 70 years after an event, to be turning up the volume on it more and more and more, just so that Jews can have more explicit identity, and so that their political lobby can continue to have the strength that it does.
I think that you've made a jump here in logic again.
Well, tell me about it. So how do you respond to it?
The public school teaching of Holocaust classes encourages Jewish identity. How?
The same reasons that were cited to you earlier with empirical data about how the Holocaust is the most unifying feature of Jewish identity, more so than belief in God.
So then why would they be targeting Florida public schools where there's
Broward? Okay, sure. I mean, for one, there are Jewish students, and there are also non-Jewish students who come to have an acceptance about explicit Jewish identity because it has been normalized in their classrooms. Meanwhile, their own identity has been pathologized. Do you deny?
I don't think that the Holocaust is about Jewish identity at all. I think that
is the single most unifying element of Jewish identity.
It's the single thing that Jews care about most, but that doesn't mean that it legitimizes Jewish identity among non-Jews. This is the jump in logic you're making.
Whoa. I see what you did there. So you're not responding to its effect on Jews. Do you deny that
I don't think that
a unifying force among Jews in terms of consolidating Jewish identity?
Yes.
Do you deny that?
But then why would they try to? Why would they try to put it in place in? Why would they? No. Why would they try? Why would they try to put it in place in Florida, where there's no Jews at all?
What do you mean there's no Jews at all? Broward County, dude, the Parkland shooting was at a 40% Jewish high school.
Have you been to Boca Raton, dude? Are you kidding me? There are no Jews.
There's a lot of old ass motherfuckers there.
Yes, old Jews.
Dude,
indeed.
Old Jews who don't have children that go to school.
So let me ask you something. Why did the Jewish lobby lobby for it so hard?
Because
they lobby for it if it was ineffective.
What do you mean? Probably because they want to increase support for Israel, and the way that they want to do that is.
You think it had absolutely nothing to do with domestic effects on Jewish political power?
No, I think that it had everything to do with domestic effects on Israel's case among non-Jews in the United States.
All Israel, nothing about the domestic Jews who actually live here. That's your position.
Because thoughts of this would be the least targeted thing in the entire world.
Okay,
right?
so then how do you explain this? The 2001 article entitled "The Jewish Stake in America's Changing Demographics" was written by Dr. Stephen Steinlight, and one of the things that he writes about is that he is concerned about the growing Hispanic portion of the U.S. demographics because the Jewish community gets away with much of its demands because of Christian guilt about the Holocaust. He says this explicitly.
What are his actual words?
You can look at. You want me to? I'll pull up the exact words. I've got to tell you this. They're a lot worse than what you probably could imagine. I did a full-length video on this.
Pull up the exact words.
Go ahead. I will pull up the exact words here.
While he pulls the words, I will say here on the show we had a Jew, and just to show how the Holocaust plays in Jewish identity, I was asking him of a difference of behavior he had with respect to what he would allow for Israel and what he would allow for whites having an ethno-state. And he said, Israel, I asked him, why does Israel have a right to an ethno-state and not the whites? And he answered, Israel is there for protecting the Jews from the greatest crime of humanity happening again.
Okay, so I have JF. Would you mind if I just read this real quick? Because it's,
go for it.
I mean, it really is the coup de grace on this. Okay, so here's the sentence. It says, and this is after talking about the Hispanic demographics. It says that America has largely tolerated this dual loyalty. That is the dual loyalty between being an American and being faithful to the Jewish state of Israel. We get a free pass, I suspect, largely over Christian guilt about the Holocaust. He says that America has largely tolerated this dual loyalty. We get a free pass, I suspect, largely over Christian guilt about the Holocaust, makes it no less a reality. And then he goes on to say that one of the reasons that Jews may lose political power with the growing rise of Hispanic strength is that being Hispanic and being primarily from Mexico, they do not have any affiliation with the Holocaust. They feel no ancestral guilt, and they are not subject to the teachings of Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council in 1965, which.
And what's the actual quote? You have it open.
Yes, I do. I just read you the exact quote. You want me to read
no. The continuing argument, because you put it in your own words.
Yes. Okay, so here you go. I'll find Hispanic one. I'm curious how you respond to the one I just read while I'm pulling this up.
Because Hispanics are subject to the teachings of Vatican II. Any Orthodox Catholic is subject to the teachings of Vatican II. The only people who aren't subject to the teachings of Vatican II are the Sedevacantists, which is a pretty small organization.
Nope. Okay, so here you go. So here's this one of these sections. Does it matter that the majority non-European immigrants have no historical experience of the Holocaust or knowledge of the persecution of Jews of the ages, and see Jews only as the most privileged and powerful of white Americans? It is important that Latinos, who know us almost entirely as employers for the menial low-wage cash services they perform for us, such as blowing leaves from our lawns in Beverly Hills or doing our laundry in Short Hills, will soon form 1/4 of the nation's population? Does it matter that most Latino immigrants have encountered Jews in their formative years, principally only as Christ killers in the context of a religious education in which the changed teachings of Vatican II barely penetrated or not at all? So how do you respond to that? Oh, and the next sentence is about fear that Jewish safe seats in Congress will soon be held by Latino representatives, which is exactly what just happened to Dianna Feinstein in California, being replaced by a Latino. She just got the back from the DNC in California of a Latino candidate. This is all. Yeah, I mean, do you want me to keep? I mean, dude, there's like so many damning things you need to respond to. You want me to just keep reading?
I don't see how that's damning. That's called an editorial trying to convince Jews not to want more immigration.
Was the head of the Center for Immigration Studies. This is no slouch. And here he is several times in one article telling you that he has existential anxiety about the fact that the Holocaust guilt has not penetrated deeply enough into the Hispanic population. Respond to that.
Okay. He had concerns that the knowledge of the Holocaust, was not as familiar among Latinos. And anyway, I don't want Latinos in our country.
So there were a dozen points there that he needed to respond to, right? Like I had just proven the point about Vatican II not penetrating into the Hispanic community. I just proven the point about Jewish political anxiety over Mexicans not being indoctrinated with Holocaust guilt. I just proven the point about Jewish identity being consolidated around the Holocaust because of quantifiable empirical data about the Holocaust being more of a unifying force for Jewish identity than belief in God. So all of those points, right? And where did Dave direct it to at the end of his non-response? By talking about how he also doesn't want Mexicans in the country, which wasn't even a point that I made, right? So then, you know, it's just one of these situations where there's not even all that much to say about it because it just wasn't a very sophisticated argument. You know, you're not dealing with somebody who wants to actually address the issues and come to conclusions or really vigorously test both sides of a hypothesis. It's just kind of fucking around and having a conversation on a Friday night. I mean, whether or not Dave does or doesn't want Mexican immigration into the U.S. is completely irrelevant to any of the points that were mentioned. So, you know, one of the reasons I don't want to spend too much time on this video is because it just wasn't a serious debate. So, you know, it's a shame. I wish it was a really high-level discussion where I could pick apart lots of different angles on how to reframe things or how to redirect or how to obfuscate. But the fact is, most of the time, it was just simple goalpost moving, refusal to answer questions, and then just lots of interruptions between there being, you know, other people on the stream, like Babylonian Hebrew had his own, you know, conversation thread going around, you know, Jewish genetic relatedness, and then there was, you know, the thread between JF and Dave about the K-Mac theory. So, you know, there was a lot going on, and it was designed more to be a conversation than blood sports. So, you know, it was sort of inappropriate to really nail things down in a more aggressive way. So, as these online debates continue to play out, I'm looking forward to having more of a platform to really tell the world our story. And if everyone just kind of runs away from it and tries to, you know, play kind of sloppy, stalling, run out the clock defense on it, well, then that's just more people who will see us shine. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, it was a nice, interesting experience and hope to be a bit more entertaining next time around. But yeah, have a great week, guys. Bye.
The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fan. The lineup consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal vanes, so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented. The main winding was of the normal Lotus-O deltoid type placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator. Every 7th conductor being connected by a non-reversible Tremi pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the gram meters.